Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video we're going to be setting up Grid Placement 5.0.3. And for the sake of having something kind of already set up, I'm going to be using the role-playing demo from the official Godot demos, since it already has a tile map and everything else set up. So if we open up the archive for the plugin, you delve in, then you'll see that there's 4 sub-archives inside of here. The demo, if you want to see an example full setup, I highly recommend that. There's one for platformer, top-down, and isometric. The source code is going to be in the plugin. And if you want some predefined templates, also helpful, then you want to put in the templates as well into your project. So if we open up the plugin, then that's going to give you the add-ons grid building directory. So we need to install that. In our project right now, there's no add-ons folder. So I can right click here and open it in File Manager. Then over here, we'll just take the add-ons folder and drag that in. It has to be add-ons/grid_building, exactly like this for this version of the plugin. And we'll have that load in automatically. So then we want the templates to get started quicker with some UI elements. So I'll open up templates, and just like before, I'll drag in the templates folder. If you already have a templates folder, you can just get this subdirectory, and we'll put that into the project. So now we have templates in here, and we have add-ons/grid_building, and let's full screen this. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is go up to the project menu, project settings, go to plugins, enable the plugin. When you do that, it should install a menu option in Project Tools to set up default import actions. The plugin has about 15 actions, 10 of which are essential, so we're going to load those in here. If you check the output, you should see the defaults added in for all of these. And then we'll go to Project Settings, Input Map, and you won't see anything here because you need to restart the project. So we'll go to Project, Reload Current Project, and now we'll check Project Settings, Input Map, and you'll see your actions loaded in here by default, all of the default actions. Now these 5 at the bottom here, the positioners, are for optional keyboard controls, but pretty much everything else is going to be essential. And they're set up for keyboard by default. So if you need other input devices, you'll need to customize those for yourself. So let's close, and now we have our game here. And we need to load in the systems for the plugin to actually work. So if you have the templates installed, you can just search systems, and you'll find systems.tscn, systems.isometric with a slightly different configuration if you need that. But I'm going to drop in systems.tscn here. And you'll notice this is just a normal node. So it's basically pure logic. And rather than keep this referencing the templates, we could just right click here and make it local. And that actually makes it easier to see these systems in our main hierarchy. So the GBInjectorSystem is basically the wiring for how everything works in the plugin. You'll see that it has the TD composition container. That's for top-down settings. So you might need to customize and tweak it a little bit if you're doing a platformer game. You can also reference the platformer demo if you need help with that. But this basically contains the configuration, settings, templates, and action names for how the plugin's going to work. So almost everything you need to configure is going to be right here in this composition container. We can also see if we go into GB settings that 2 placement rules here have been defined by default. So one of the main features of the grid placement plugin is the ability to evaluate rules against tile map positions when you are placing objects into the scene. So the most essential one for that would be a collisions check rule, of course, which you can expand and customize the masks and layers for that if you need to. That will make sure that there's no collisions under the object being placed, essentially. And then within TileMap bounds rule, make sure that there are valid tiles under whatever you're placing. So that's my default setup for a top-down game, which is basically what we're dealing with in this demo here. Okay, so that's the bulk of our base configuration, and these systems, you can see there's really nothing you need to assign in the inspector. You just need to have those inside of your game scene if you want the functionality to work. Next, we need to add a level context to our game level to assign the tile map. And we also need to add in a GBOwnerNode to our player so that the system knows what object is actually responsible for placing all of these objects into the game world. So if we go into the exploration scene here and open that in editor, then you'll see that this has some tile map layers. So that's what we're looking for. You'd probably have a level scene in your own game. So I'm going to right click here on exploration, and we're going to add a new node, level context. GBLevelContext, and we're going to assign the tile map for the ground, because generally we're placing things on the ground. So if this is the only tile layer that you're concerned with, you don't really need to assign the maps array here. it'll default this into the array by default. So no need to do customization there. Now, if this is the only TileMap layer that's really relevant to you, then you can just leave it like that. You don't have to assign all of your TileMap layers into the maps here. And we can go down to objects parent. So this is where objects are being instanced under in terms of the node hierarchy. So we have this scene, and we might want a node to be responsible for holding all of the spawned placeable objects. So I'm going to right click here on the root and add in a new node 2D. I'll just call it placed objects, keep it simple. And then in GBLevelContext, I'll drag and drop the objects parent, which is placed objects. That means any object that gets spawned in the scene, it's going to be under this part of the hierarchy. Okay, and then we need to click on the player and open that up. So our player is going to be responsible for placing objects with the grid placement system. So I right click on the character, add a child node. Let's find a GBOwnerNode, add that in, assign the root. So now this points to the root as the actual character in the game, rather than just this component node. Okay, now would be a decent time to just run this scene and see if we get any warnings or errors in the console. And we'll see if we get any. Okay, so we do have a couple left. Yes. So it says the positioner is null. So you have to have a node or a cursor in the scene that takes responsibility for being the parent of all of the objects being placed. So we have a pre-built scene for that as well. So if you look for positioner in your project, the file system, we'll have the positioner stack or the positioner stack isometric if you need it to be slanted for those isometric games. And we want to put this somewhere into our main game. So we drop that in, and we have our little cursor there. If you want, you can open up the stack scene. You can see that there is the positioner, the root node, the indicator manager for creating the indicators, and the targeting shape cast for doing physics queries against what's under it on the grid. And then the targeting shape cast 2D is responsible for picking up targets for things to move or manipulate. So let's go back out to the main scene. And if we run this one more time, now we probably won't have any errors, and we can move the mouse cursor. You can see that the graphic is way too small because the tile map size on this game is 64 by 64. So to fix that, we could go into the grid positioner. Up to you if you want to copy this into your main project. I probably would do that, just so that if there's ever an update to the templates, yours don't get overwritten. So we can move and duplicate that to, let's create a new folder for placement. And I'll copy it in there. And now if we're editing this one, we can change the sprite size. And we're going to want to increase the scale by 4. Now that's going to look a little blurry. The default templates I put in are pixel art. So to fix that, you would generally want to go into the project settings and change rendering to nearest. But since this is not a pixel art game, I don't know if that'll interfere with anything. Looks fine, I think. So that's our cursor. We can run this scene again. And now it should be snapping perfectly to the tile sizes. Okay, yes, that looks much better. Now we need to actually define placeable scenes into the game. So in the placement folder, I'm going to right click and let's create a folder for placeables. I'll get rid of this little search term so that it's not hiding other things. And then in the placeables folder, I'm going to right click, create a new resource, and we're going to look for placeable. So there's 2 versions here, placeable and placeable sequence. If you need something like an upgradable tower, then placeable sequence makes sense because it allows you to have a view where you can basically tab between the different versions of a building. If it's a one-off building, you should use placeable instead, which would be the default. So I'll create that. And let's say bush placeable.tres and save that. So in the project, there are bush graphics here. So I'm going to use this graphic as the icon, and then I'll take the name of this placeable as bush. We'll need to create a placed scene, and we're also going to need at least one categorical tag to basically separate the different placeables into groups. So if we create a categorical tag here, just create that. Let's say bushes, grass, etc. And I'm going to call this the foliage category. I'll use the bush icon as the graphic here. Okay, and then I probably want to save this categorical tag to the placement folder. So let's say tags here as a new folder. and I'll say tag foliage.tres, and we save that for reuse in other placeables. So they can also be tagged the same way and fall under the same group in the UI. The last thing, very important, is we'll need to assign a packed scene here. So in order to create a scene for placement, let's just open up a new scene, a 2D scene. I'll make the root bush. Let's save that. I'll also put it in the placement folder, but let's call it scenes, sure. Bush.tscn. And then we're going to need a sprite 2D for this. So let's say sprite 2D. Let's zoom in and assign the texture here. Okay, I might want to move this up to the top here. Because it's a grid-based system, grid placement, you probably want to be working with the grid snapping enabled. So I might configure the snap here for something like grid snap 32 pixels, primary lanes every 4 steps. Okay, I think I misdid that. Hold on, 32 by 32 pixels. Yes, okay, that looks better. So that'll give us a better idea of the grid and where the indicators are going to spawn. So each tile gets one indicator if your collision shapes are defined to be picked up by a collision shape rule. So let's get into that in a second. But first, we'll just test that we can actually place the scene into the game world. So we have our bush. We need to go to the bush placeable, and we assign our bush scene to the packed scene. So this is the object that's getting placed into the game world. And then we need to set up our UI. So in the root, you can do your UI however you want, but I'm going to add in a CanvasLayer node here. And then under that, I'll add a control. That control I'm going to rename to be the HUD. And because this is the root of everything else under it, if I assign a theme here, it's going to apply to everything in that hierarchy. So let's add in the essential templates. We're going to need a selection UI. So I'll just drag that under the HUD. And let's see. Okay, I think the issue here is that the HUD hasn't been made full size. So on the HUD, I'm going to go to layout and make this full rect. And a control by default, one gotcha, is that it's going to be set to filter stop, which means it'll block UI input. That's not good. Set it to ignore because this takes up the full screen. So you don't want it to block all mouse input events. And then the placeable selection UI will default over here to the right. So in this tab, you can manually assign individual tags or placeable sequences if you need to, or if they are all located in one folder, which I would recommend, then you can assign a folder, at least one for placeables and one for categorical tags. So let's assign in placement tags this folder. Okay, so now it'll pick up all the tags, and then placeable folder, we go to placement, placeables, select the current folder. So now if we run the game, we should see on the UI over here our placeable, and then the tag showing up here to differentiate between the categories. So we can select our bush, click on the screen, and place it. And you can see it's allowing us to place anywhere because we haven't defined a collision shape for the placement scene. And you can also see the indicator is way too small. We'll have to increase the size of that. Add child node, and we can do collision shape 2D. So I'll click here and we'll do a rectangle shape. I'll just move it up here, and you can make it roughly the size of the object. You don't have to make it all the way. It's more dependent on where you want the object to actually collide with. So just these 2 squares is probably fine. And that's going to mean we also need to change the root type. So we could make it a static body 2D. We could also make it an area 2D. It kind of depends on if you want collision or not. So I'll change the type here. And let's say we're going to do a area 2D for default. Since we'll just skip collision, this is just more like for placement. And then on the layers here, we want it to be at least one of the layers that our collision check rule is actually evaluating. So if we go to the game and we check the injector system and we drill down into the rules here, we can see that the collision check rule by default is going to do 1. In the template, it's also doing 10. That's so you can distinguish between layers where collisions actually happen and then layers that are just for checking things like, is this space placeable or that kind of thing. So you can differentiate between what your objects actually collide with in game and what you use just for checking for rules like these. Okay, so we have layer 1 there, so it should be just fine. So we'll go ahead and run the main scene. I'll click on the bush, and we'll see a few indicators pop up, like one for each tile that it hovers over, and that it at least has partial space in the tile, I should say. Okay, now for the indicators to render the right size, we'll need to go back to the game. Let's look for the indicator template in the file system. So we have 16 by 16 and then the isometric version. So I'm going to right click here and move duplicate this to the placement folder. So I'll copy that. And then let's rename it either the size or _game, whatever makes sense to you. Jump into it. And then we'll change the size of the sprite. I'll just scale it up 4 times. Or if you want to make a 64 by 64 pixel sprite for that, that's fine too. Yeah, and then we'll just make sure this is assigned in the GBInjectorSystem templates. So we'll drag our 64 by 64 and replace the original template one. Hit play, run the project. And now if we hit play, then we'll see the indicators actually appear there for our object. If I place it now, then you'll see that the original bush is now blocking placement of the other ones. Now we don't really get feedback here though when we just click around. The rules evaluate, but we can't see anything as a player. So the next thing we want to add is going to be the action log, which there's a template for. So action log into the HUD. I might move it to the bottom left. If you like, you might also add in the hotbar, if I can find that. Maybe that was called action bar actually. And we'll position that at the center bottom. So I'll go to layout and change the anchors to center bottom. Pops it right down there. Now these base UI, it's fine. There are a couple of themes that I provide in the plugin templates. So we can just drag the warm earth theme straight onto the HUD. Might make it look a little nicer. Then we can hit play. And let's see if we can evaluate the rules here. So I'm going to click on the bush. And you'll see that it shows you now when you change to build mode. I can place, so the bush built successfully. If I place here, it'll show that it fails and why it failed. I think we can also do 1, 2, 3, 4 on the keyboard to switch between the different modes. Now you can see the hotbar automatically responds to that. You can click on the modes too, if you prefer the button approach. The placement selection UI pops up whenever you are in build mode. Okay, now if you want to go to move mode and hover over a target and actually have it basically show whether it's targeted or not, then we want to add in a target highlighter. So let's right click on the grid targeting system, add in the target highlighter. Okay, and now if we go at play, that subsystem should automatically help us target items in the scene. So I'll go to 3, hover over this object, and you can see that it is not movable because it has no manipulatable node attached to it. And now it's only going to be showing the target for objects that actually have the right layer. So what you can do is make a targetable layer, and then just by that, you can determine whether an object is going to be highlighted or not, or even be a candidate for trying to move or trying not to move in your game. And where you would find that is if you look in the grid positioner stack, this collision mask is going to determine that. So if we look at the character has no physics shape here, so it would not collide with the targeting shape cast. So you have to have at least an area 2D or a static body or some other kind of physics 2D body in order to be targetable by default here. But if you want an object to actually be movable or manipulatable, then on the scene, and this would be for any scene in the game, not just the ones that you place, but you can right click here, add a child node, and then it's a manipulatable node. So this component, we assign the root, and we create a settings for the object, manipulatable settings. Okay, so in manipulatable settings here, the main thing you need to focus on are these 5 settings: rotatable, flip horizontal, flip vertical, movable, and demolishable. So those are going to mostly correspond with the project settings input map. We scroll down and there are these actions: rotate left, rotate right, flip horizontal, flip vertical. And demolish mode, you would confirm the demolish by doing the confirm action here. So that's left mouse button by default. So if you want an object to be flippable, we can toggle those on, and rotatable as well. We go into play mode. And now if we grab this scene, while you're placing it originally or when you decide to move it, you can press the rotate keys or the flip keys, and you're going to be able to manipulate them based on whatever the manipulatable settings are. So I'll place this into the scene, and let's go 3 to move mode. I'll hover over it, and because it's movable, I can left click now, and we can move this to a new location. You have access to the rotate and flip commands here again, so we can just move it right over there and keep doing that. And since it requires the manipulatable node, any object, even if it's targeted by the targeting shapecast, by default isn't movable or manipulatable. Since this is separate from the placeable concept, you can simply just add a manipulatable node to anything into your game, even if you don't mean to actually place that into the scene as the placement process. So that's part of why there's separate systems here between the building system and the manipulation system to begin with. So that's essentially the basic setup for the plugin. There's a lot of settings in the composition container you can play around with, a few extra rules you can create. You can also make your own rules. That was one of the things I really wanted to emphasize here. So if you have some custom game logic you need to evaluate for placement, that's a good idea, and you can just put it into the placement rules here. You can also assign rules per placeable if you have unique rules. For instance, in the top-down demo, which you could check out, the concept of spending resources when you place a building into the scene, there's a working example of that there. So check out the demos. It should have some good guidance there on how you can set things up a little bit further. But aside from that, that's pretty much going to be about it. I'm going to also try to have another video out on walking through the demos as well. So check my channel for that soon if it's not already out.